to a new episode of The World Today, where we bring you the latest news items from all the websites online. And of course, I'm delighted to be joined this afternoon in the studio by my guest, Ms. Minan Khoter, our journalist and our political analyst, who will be reading more details into our news items. Minan, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Right, let's start straight away from Al-Ahram Online, and the headline reads, Egypt has no intention to amend Arab Peace Initiative, a statement by the Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry. He is in Ramallah to carry out President Sisi's message of support to the Palestinians. The Egyptian government has no intention to push for amending the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said in an interview with the Palestine TV. The Foreign Minister was in the West Bank capital Wednesday to deliver a message from the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, expressing support for the two-state solution to the conflict with Israel. The Arab Peace Initiative calls for Israel's withdrawal from territories it occupied after the 1967 Six-Day War, resolving the issue of Palestinian refugees, a point of contention for the Israelis. In exchange for Palestinian statehood, Arab states will normalize relations with Israel. Now, Minan, how do you evaluate the Egyptian efforts in the Palestinian cause?
Well, I think Egypt has done some unprecedented measures over the past month in terms of the Palestinian conflict, because, I mean, our Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry is now in Ramallah pushing for more talks and for the peace initiative, and also when Egypt was heading the United Nations Security Council in May, the issue was raised during the meetings in Cairo with the Arab League member states and also with the UN Security Council delegation representing the council. So I think Egypt is pushing for talks and pushing to execute the peace initiative, which has recently gained some global momentum after the Paris meeting in early June. And I think now, after what happened at the Paris meeting with the Palestinian and the Israeli Prime Minister saying that there needs to be direct negotiations, I think what Egypt is doing is trying to ensure that the resolutions are going to maintain peace and security in the region as well, and promote the rights of the Palestinians and execute the resolutions that preserve their rights as well. So, and also I recall that there was a meeting between Norwegian peace envoy with our Minister Sameh Shoukry recently in order to further, discuss the issue. So I think this is a time where there's a lot of meetings and talks going on the issue from our side and also from other countries as well. And yeah, so
what, in your opinion, is the best time for the Palestinian and Arab countries to push for a decision in the United Nations Security Council to stop Israeli settlements in Palestinian occupied territories?
I think it's already started. Egypt started already doing some efforts in this regard, and during the last meeting where some of the Security Council representatives met with Arab League members, they already agreed to raise the issue before the Security Council, and I think it's just a matter of time until you get both parties to talk and to agree to those terms. And I think
it's interesting because, as you said, it is a matter of time for the parties to talk. However, on the sidelines, there is the day-to-day casualties. For example, yesterday, a Palestinian man died because of inhalation of tear gas that was fired on him by Israeli forces. Also, a Palestinian woman, also died on Friday. So these incidents, how do you view, where do they fit in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and initiative for peace?
I think this is an increased, there is an increased outrage on the local level, regardless, besides the talks that has been going on for a while now, there is on the local level more negative feedback from both sides, and it usually starts from the Israeli side, where there are attacks and increased settlements and acts of brutality towards Palestinians, and then those acts, end up with clashes, and so I think it's a violation somehow to the talks that are going on now, and I think it doesn't help the peace negotiation process.
Absolutely right. Minan Khater, our journalist, still continuing with our news items. Let's move to the Daily News Egypt, and the headline reads, Egypt repays Qatar final $1 billion in outstanding debt. This is the Central Bank of Egypt governor who said Egypt has repaid $1 billion to Qatar, the last batch in a $3 billion debt owed to the Gulf country. Tarek Amir, the Egyptian Central Bank governor, announced on Friday, and in statements to the state-owned MENA news agency, he said the central bank repaid the entire amount borrowed by Cairo at an interest rate of 3 to 4% against treasury bonds offered by Egypt to Qatar during the rule of the ousted President Mohamed Morsi. The bonds were covered by the Qatari National Bank and listed on the Irish Stock Exchange. A positive development. We are no longer in debt.
Yeah, finally. It's, I think, a key milestone for Egypt in terms of paying back the foreign debts, and especially when it comes to Qatar, because it has been propagated recently that Egypt is in an economic crisis and cannot pay the debts that it has for Qatar. But it turns out that it's not true, because now that we have finally paid the last batch of our debts to Qatar, we prove that this is wrong and this is not true. And so I think it's a great step forward.
Indeed, right. Let's move to the Daily Star Lebanon, and the headline reads, 3 killed as Libya forces close on central Sirte against Daesh. Now, Libyan forces fighting to free the city of Sirte from Daesh terrorists have surrounded a conference hall in the area still held by the terrorists after airstrikes and clashes that killed at least 3 pro-government fighters. Forces allied with Libya's unity government began a campaign 2 months ago to free Sirte from Daesh after militants took advantage of the fighting between rival factions to gain territory and control the coastal city last year. 3 fighters were killed and more than 30 injured during the fighting on Friday after the Daesh terrorists were driven out of the residential 700 district in fierce clashes that involved rockets, mortars, as well as gun battles. Now, Minan, how do you describe the situation, the crisis in Libya? And in your opinion, what has led to the escalation in the country?
Yeah, the country now it's a problem, I think, of not just religious or extremism crisis. It's a problem of, it's a fight towards power and wealth in Libya, especially that Libya is a very rich country and it has a very rich resources. So I think it's more than just, sectarian or political crisis. But I think in Libya there were some factors that have led to this escalation until now, since 2011. The fact that there has been a ban on weapons on the government side in order not to acquire any weapons from abroad. So I think
but it has been recently lifted. Or a call for its lifting has been
there are calls
approved.
But it's a good step, but still it is an obstacle for as
The
we see,
Libyan
like,
government.
more militants attacking some parts of Libya. And also the fact that since 2011 there haven't been a solid institutions that could do significant reforms on the ground after the uprising that took place. So this actually has led to a chaos and an armed fight in Libya. So it's another factor why it's
And the split in Libya itself. I mean, recently the Prime Minister has called for Libyans to unite against the fight against the Daesh terrorist group. At the same time, the split has further weakened the Libyan official government.
I think those attacks are not helpful, but I think what the government is doing now is trying to enforce the accord and that was approved, the UN-backed plan that was approved recently, and it's gaining support, worldwide support from other countries as well. So, yeah.
Let's move to the Gulf today, and another headline reads: Syria rebels retake a key town in Latakia. The rebel forces seized a strategic town from Syrian government forces and their allies in the western coastal province of Latakia on Friday. The Syrian government forces had captured Khan Saba in February, part of a wide advance in Latakia's northern countryside at the time, backed by Russian air power. Fighting picked up again in the area after a ceasefire deal later that month brought a temporary lull. The truce has mostly unraveled throughout areas where it took effect in the west of the country. The Al-Qaeda-affiliated Nusra Front was amongst the groups that retook the town, which had previously been an important base for the insurgents. The situation in Syria, again, another sore spot in the region. How do you view the rebels retaking another key town from the government forces? Plus, of course, on the other side, there's the Daesh terrorists having their own fight. The deterioration in Syria has had terrible consequences for the Syrians and has spilled over to Europe with the migrant crisis, etc. So let's go back to Syria. What, in your opinion, is the most important thing that needs to be done now in Syria in order to reach some sort of stability or just ceasefire agreements?
I think there was already a ceasefire agreement reached,
but it has fallen through.
Exactly. Those are violations to the agreement. Exactly. So I think this is the most important thing, to have a ceasefire agreement, but it's not very easy to achieve, since we have in the Security Council we have we have the United States which is supporting the rebel troops in Syria, and we also have Russia, which is allegedly supporting the Syrian regime. So it's very complicated to reach an agreement. But however, the ceasefire initiative was also a great step that should be enforced, and because otherwise there are, like what you said, severe consequences on the human side and leading to more refugees inside Syria and also
you
in
think with
countries.
The situation with the migrants and the refugees, you think that the international community would take a bigger step in order to reach some sort of resolution? Why do you think they haven't done this so far? I'm sure they can do more than what is being done on the ground.
Like I said, because it's not an internal situation in Syria. It's like a third world war. Like you have bigger powers fighting in Syria indirectly. You have the rebel, which is supported by other foreign countries, and you have also the Islamic State terrorist group, which is actually composed of many nationalities, not just Syrians, and also they are supported by other countries, like border countries and nearby countries such as Turkey, which allows them to gives them access to the borders. And it's not easy, when you have the influx of jihadists from other countries around the world. It's hard to reach a solution immediately, but it needs a lot of efforts from all sides and not just from Syria, and it needs extra measures and also to uproot the extremism mentality itself. So
indeed. Let's go to the Khalij Times in Fallujah. Broken remnants of a Daesh state. Iraq's Daesh flag flying over Iraq's Fallujah is in tatters, and its fighters are dead or gone, leaving behind a broken city of bomb-rigged buildings and empty streets. Only scattered signs of Daesh's self-declared caliphate remain in Fallujah, a city west of Baghdad that was seized by anti-government fighters in early 2014 and later became a key militant stronghold. The story of Fallujah is de facto independence from Baghdad, which some initially hailed as liberation from a discriminatory government, has ended in mass displacement and destruction, from which it will take years to fully recover. Now, police have detonated massive cache of explosives in a house in central Fallujah, sending a towering cloud of dust rising over the city and spraying debris across the neighborhood. Security personnel walked down another empty street searching for bombs in buildings so they could be dealt with later. Now, Fallujah is no longer under the control of the Daesh terrorists. Would you see this as a victory for the situation in Iraq? Do you see that it is also a motive to continue retaking back cities and towns that have been taken over by these terrorists?
I think, yeah, of course, it's a great step forward, and the reason why it has succeeded is that it was a huge part of it was depending on the Iraqi military itself and their personnel, and not just the fact that it involved Iraqi citizens who know exactly where do those militants hide and know the exact locations and how to perform those attacks so that they can be effective and not just depending entirely on, for example, support from the United States or other countries in terms of weapons, because it's not as helpful as exactly knowing their targets and their locations. So I think this is a great step, and it can also help in liberating Mosul in the next step.
So you're saying that Iraqi forces have achieved a great advance in liberating Fallujah and a possibility of liberating other areas without the assistance of the international community or international U.S. Forces. Do you think this means something? It means if the international community wants to really root out the Daesh terrorists, they could.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, yeah.
Let me ask you, why do you think American allies have prepared the government on Mosul rather than risk getting bogged down in a potentially drawn-out fight for a smaller stronghold like Fallujah?
I'm not sure, but it turns out that Fallujah was easier, to liberate. Yeah, so I think it's a great achievement, and it makes it easier for Mosul to be liberated as well.
Indeed. Right, let's move to the World Bulletin, and another headline reads, Bangladesh Prime Minister determined to root out terrorism. Bangladeshi security forces ended a siege Saturday after storming a cafe in Dhaka where dozens of diners had been held captive through the night and shot dead 6 of the hostage takers. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said she was determined to eradicate terrorism in Bangladesh after security forces stormed the cafe where the terrorists had taken dozens of diners hostage. It was an extremely heinous act, and what kind of people are these, and they do not have any religion, she said in a televised speech. She also said people must resist these terrorists, and her government is determined to root out terrorism and militancy from Bangladesh. Now, the Daesh terrorist group has claimed responsibility for the recent attack in this Bangladesh cafe, which killed 20 people. Another tragic event, and Daesh, do you think Daesh is rooting out, spreading out, moving over now to other countries in Asia?
It is actually, yes, and it is also expected because, like I said, ISIS is the fact that it has been recruiting foreign fighters over the past years, and then those fighters, they impose a very huge risk on the national security of their countries. So this is why I think the fact that ISIS is now spreading out to more countries is only one of the consequences that ISIS has been preparing for over the past years since it started fighting in Syria and in Iraq and recruiting many members of other nationalities. So it has propagated the idea of extremism in other parts of the world, and so I think it's very risky, and you never expect exactly, especially in Europe when we see also more attacks going on. It's because actually I believe that in Europe there are many European citizens who are involved in the fight with ISIS. So it's a risk, and
involved as in they support.
Yes,
or
exactly. They join the fight.
What do you think is the reason behind, for example? I mean, you can understand that people in the Middle East region would have specific reasons for joining Daesh. However, people in Europe, for example, most of them are quite well educated, comfortable financially, socially, in a good arena. What do you think motivate these people to go and join such terrorist groups and extremists?
Yeah, I think, well, ISIS was unfortunately smart enough to recruit those people as well, and convincing them that this will be much better for them. And in Europe, like what you said, there is a better standard of living, but there are also depressions and growing inequality in some countries where now jobs and also education is not, it's declining somehow, especially in some countries in Europe, like what we have witnessed recently, the Brexit,
the British exit from the EU.
The British exit. So, and it's part of that is because there has been a decline in some of the people think there is a decline because of the immigrants influx, but I think so
the issue of xenophobia was also a very strong issue.
Exactly. So, but it's everywhere. It's not just in the Middle East. It's about how to convince those people to join you. It was smart enough from their side, unfortunately.
They did indeed succeed. Let's go to The Guardian, and the headline reads, Brexit cannot be cancelled or delayed, says François Hollande. Now, French President says UK must face consequences of its vote, and a quick exit from the EU would avert economic instability. French President François Hollande has stepped up the pressure on the UK over its timetable to leave the EU, insisting that the Brexit cannot be cancelled or delayed, and that Britain will have to live with the consequences. His hardline comments came after a meeting with David Cameron in northern France. Hollande said a speedy Brexit would avert all uncertainties and instability, especially in the economic and financial domains. The faster it goes, the better it will be. His timetable is in stark contrast to those, of course, of Michael Gove and Theresa May, the leading candidates to replace Cameron as Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister, who said they will not trigger the Article 50 process until the end of the year. Now, the British exit from the EU. A big surprise to some, not so big for others. How do you view their exit and the consequences of their exit for A, the European Union, and B, for Britain itself, for the United Kingdom?
Well, I think, it was shocking to know that this was actually, they put this decision into effect when the percentage of voting was not very big between both sides. And this has created definitely a division between the UK citizens, and where some of them opposed the decision, and it will further complicate things and create political division between them. And also many UK citizens who have other citizenships are now from the European Union countries are now trying to acquire those their citizenships from the other countries in order to stay in as EU citizens. So it has, of course, negative consequences, and on the economic side also it has it will not be any better for the UK, since they believed it would be better when they voted to exit, because they believe they pay a lot of fund for the EU, but in fact when they exit from the EU, they will be treated as, it will affect their trade as well, and they will be treated as a foreign country outside the EU.
Outside the EU. So, another thing with the Brexit, a lot of leaders have called, they say they have respected the decision of the British people. However, maybe they could reconsider the referendum or take it back, as a lot of leaders have said. But this is indeed not a possibility, and there is pressure for the United Kingdom to get the process on the way to exit. Do you think that, as President François Hollande said, it will mean less instability for the markets? We all saw the stock markets worldwide, even in Egypt, fluctuated and dropped with the referendum.
I think, of course, it will have consequences if other countries decided to exit, like Scotland, and decided to put this decision into effect. And I think it will not be helpful for the EU as well, but because it was depending. A great part of the economy, of course, was dependent also on the UK as well. So I think it's not a good step for both sides. But if But yeah, if the UK is willing to proceed with it, then I guess they won't be able to take it back.
Prevent it, indeed. Right, I am afraid we have run out of time. My guest, Minan Khoter, our journalist and our guest today on this edition of The World Today. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, with that we wrap up today's edition of The World Today. My name is Angie Meher. Many thanks for joining us.